Singles is a 1992 romantic comedy directed by Cameron Crowe.
It focuses on the lives of four Gen Xers in the early 90s living in Seattle. And so the title Singles sort of comes from not only the fact that some of them are single, but also that they all live in single-bedroom apartments in the same building. Janet, played by Bridget Fonda, who works in a coffee shop. Matt Dillon, who plays Cliff, who is the lead singer of a sort of up-and-coming... Well, they're not really up-and-coming, are they? A wannabe up-and-coming grunge band by the name of Citizen Dick. And then you've got Steve, played by Campbell Scott. He lives there too, and he works for sort of in transportation. He's sort of putting together a proposal for a super train, which is in an effort to get everyone out of their cars, stop all the gridlock in the city. Debbie, played by Sheila Kelly. And there's also Linda, played by Kira Sedgwick, who doesn't live in the same apartment block, but starts a relationship with Steve after they meet at a club. So yeah, it's obviously the backdrop is the up-and-coming grunge scene. The point when the film was made was sort of this, a local Seattle sound. It hadn't sort of hit the big time during filming because, mainly because of Nevermind and because Smells Like Teen Spirit hadn't hit the airwaves quite yet. And that's obviously the catalyst that exploded grunge across the world. Bands like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden were well established at the time. And we see those bands playing in clubs that the characters go to. And obviously, one of the main characters, Cliff, is in one of these bands. And the rest of the bandmates are members of Pearl Jam. So you've got Eddie Vedder, Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament are all his bandmates. And even Chris Cornell makes a little... Well, we see Soundgarden playing. Chris Cornell also appears in the background in one scene as well. Doesn't say anything, but he nods his head along. So it's kind of, the trials and tribulations of relationships is kind of the main thrust of the plot, mainly centering around Steve and Linda and Janet and Cliff. Janet and Cliff kind of have this sort of on-off thing. Janet's a little bit obsessed with him. Cliff kind of... I think when we first meet him, he says to her, you know I still see other people, right? And she's like, oh no, don't be silly, of course you don't. So she's kind of blind to his sort of ways. And Steve and Linda have both just got out of sort of unpleasant relationships, so are both a bit wary of getting into a new relationship so quickly. You sort of classic rom-com kind of stuff. A little bit less cliched, I would say, than your standard rom-com fare.
Yeah, I agree. So this is obviously our third week of bands, and obviously there's one of the main characters in this film is in a band, and of course, like Simon has said, there are other bands, real bands, dotted around in the film as well. But I think, it's an interesting film this week because it's obviously very early 90s, so it does have that kind of 90s feel. There's another film that reminds me of Reality Bites with Ethan Hawke and Winona Ryder, which came out a couple of years later. That's another kind of similar types of music in the soundtrack, and that's about relationships. So it's definitely got that feel to it. But this one's different because it has this kind of backdrop of the Seattle sound. It has this backdrop of musicians and bands, and obviously growing up, we were. I think Simon mentioned last week. I was listening to death metal. He was listening to grunge, but I liked that scene because I started listening to stuff like this. I was first into bands like. Well, and I still love Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam, and obviously Faith No More were a big one for us as well. So the kind of the more alt rock grunge, which it became, and I think that's what makes this one, because it is at its heart, it is a romantic comedy, and it feels like most romantic comedies that came out around that time and still come out today. It's got that formula. But it's not cliche. I suppose maybe because it was one of the first. I mean, obviously romantic comedies have been around for, you go way back to like the 60s, 50s, 40s. There are romantic comedies. Obviously the kind of romantic comedies we have now, I think maybe started in maybe the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, this is definitely a formula that we still see today. But it's perfectly, it's a good, solid romantic comedy that people like we maybe enjoy because of its background and its culture and its soundtrack that it's got, and I think that really helps with it. And they're all great leads. I mean, Bridget Fonda is a great actress, and Matt Dillon is great. I mean, what I really like about Matt Dillon in here is a little bit like his character in To Die For, the Nicole Kidman film, which we also covered, where he plays a drummer in a band in that. He's very similar to that, but he's very good at playing a band member. Because, I mean, obviously his band is this band, Citizen Dick. He is supported by members of Pearl Jam. So the other members in the band are actually band members. So they're not actors. But he's quite good at not, do you know what I mean? He's like, he just kind of, although he is one of the leads, he works well. I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say, but he's like another band member. But he's obviously
if he was in a band in real life, that wouldn't be surprising to you.
It wouldn't be surprising, no. And I'm not saying that's a negative. I think he's very good at playing that kind of cool band member.
Although he has got a sort of overinflated sort of opinion of himself and the band.
He's got that kind of front man ego, loves himself, but maybe none of the critics love him either. It's also, I mean, there's a couple of, because I wouldn't say it's necessarily, it's not like laugh out loud funny.
No,
but again, most romantic comedies I wouldn't say are laugh out loud. But it does, there's a couple of moments, there's a great line in here where I think he's talking about, there's a song that Citizen Dick have got called Touch Me, I'm Dick.
And which is basically the same as Touch Me, I'm Sick by Mudhoney with different lyrics.
Exactly, it's like that. But what I was going to say is that kind of, it doesn't, this film obviously is not Spinal Tap, it doesn't go full on Spinal Tap, but there are moments in this film that I think are kind of poking fun at that world, and that's why I think it stands out from other romantic comedies. But of course it was written and directed by Cameron Crowe, who himself was a rock journalist, whose life was kind of, he based his life in the film Almost Famous. So I think it gives.
And of course, he was from Seattle as well, so he was familiar with the bands and the scene.
Before this, he made Say Anything with John Cusack. I mean, you'll get romantic comedies that just sit there with all the other romantic comedies and are okay, and then occasionally you get a decent romantic comedy that has something different going on. And I think that this is one of those films. It's a romantic comedy that's got something else injected inside of it. To make it kind of stand out from the crowd a little bit.
I mean, I think what I liked about it is that, a lot of rom-coms are sort of almost forced arguments. The characters do stupid things that then create some sort of friction between them. But there isn't really any of that here. It's a little bit, with like, oh, when should I call her? And then he leaves it too many. He doesn't want to bother her too much, or he doesn't want to seem too keen, but then he doesn't want to ignore her, and then he waits a few days, but then that turns out to be too long, and she gets the hump with him, but he doesn't labour on that too much. That's only a very short scene, and it doesn't, it's not like it then ruins their relationship or anything like that. So some of these rom-coms, they try out all the same old things that people do to each other, or stupid decisions they make when they're early in a relationship, but it doesn't really do too much of that. So for me, that felt a little bit more authentic, a little bit more realistic. And he does deal with some quite important issues like sort of unwanted pregnancies and miscarriage and things like that. But I think because the tone of the film is pretty even throughout, I would say. There's funny moments and there's sort of tragic moments, but it never labours on either of them, and it keeps the same tone. So it's never overly dramatic and it's never over the top funny. So it kind of, everything's a little bit more grounded, and the characters react in a more genuine way to these things, I think.
It also feels very genuine, and I think it feels quite realistic. I mean, these are emotions that most of us go through. Obviously this is an American film, but these kind of feelings and emotions are the same for anywhere, whatever scene and whatever music and whatever things you like in the world. We all go through this period in our lives, maybe in our 20s or our 30s, where you're kind of trying to adjust as an adult and trying to, unless you're lucky and you've met someone and you stay with them all your life, a lot of us do go through kind of different relationships, and we have these thoughts, and these are films that kind of, they understand what it's like to be that person, that young person, and I think this is certainly one of those films. It's also it's a bit documentary style, this film, so there's a lot of monologues, there's lots of like talking heads talking to the camera, which again I think was a kind of a thing coming out of the 80s and into the 90s. I mean, you had things like John Hughes was doing a lot of that around that time. And
it reminded me of Sex. I don't know if you've probably never seen Sex and the City, but
I haven't.
The earlier seasons, that was exactly what it was like. It was like people being interviewed.
Right. Okay.
There was in between the other scenes, and it felt a little bit Friends as well, maybe. And apparently Cameron Crowe reckons that
I read that. Yeah.
Friends was influenced by
That's
it.
a sweeping
Possibly.
statement.
It is a little bit. It's a little bit. I mean, it's not completely dissimilar, though. I mean, obviously, some of them live in the same apartment building, so not completely out of the question that maybe some idea, it was the seed of an idea for somebody. The most unrealistic bit I found of it was when they go to the club and Alice in Chains are playing, and they're barely paying any attention. Lane and lads are giving it all.
They are giving it all. It's a great moment. Yeah.
Steve's just, not really into it. So he's more interested in looking over at Linda.
But they're having a chat, and you're like, how the hell can you hear each other? You can never have a chat at a gig. What the hell?
I mean, they afterwards they reference the fact they can't hear each other properly because they're talking so loud. So,
but no, you're right. It's who would stand there and talk while Alice in Chains is playing?
Yeah.
And it's a great.
I mean, that's he doesn't. While it's great to have that sort of background of the Seattle scene, none of them really, apart from obviously Cliff, who's in it, none of them really strike me as people that would be into that music. I don't know. None of them ever seem that bothered. I mean, obviously at one point Steve's walking around in a Mudhoney t-shirt. It's like, do you really like Mudhoney? They chuck records on at one point, but they don't put any grunge on or anything. So I don't know.
Yeah, they're kind of like these 30-somethings, architects, and one works for an environmental agency, one's an architect. It's the kind of things that those films, the kind of jobs that those people in those films have. In that period, and you're like, yeah, would you be in Alice in Chains? Would you be into Alice in Chains? Maybe, I don't know. But it's a nice backdrop for the film. But what it does give us, of course, is it gives us these wonderful. I mean, it's got a great soundtrack, and we get to see Soundgarden, and we get to see Alice in Chains play. Obviously, now we've lost both the front men of both those bands, so it was really nice to just. I mean, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden too. An absolutely great band. And if you know the film, you'll see that I am actually wearing the same top as Kim Thiel in the band, although he's actually got corrosion of conformity. So I thought I'd nod to the film there, because it's just it's really nice seeing those bands, because it's not often you get to see bands that you like, I suppose, and that kind of music in films, and that's really nice. And it's got a great soundtrack. I mean, like I said, Mudhoney's on the soundtrack, and Tad are on the soundtrack. Jane's Addiction are there.
I've got it here, although not all those bands. There's no Jane's Addiction or Tad.
It's also got what's the Pearl Jam song? Is it State of the no, that's the Biohazard. State of Love and Trust.
Oh, State of Love and Trust. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, I always really like. It's a really kind of good upbeat, and because I'm not the biggest Pearl Jam fan, I think I like the first two albums, and then I went off them. But that song is really kind of upbeat and a good energetic song.
But yeah, I mean, the soundtrack, did massive business. I mean, Warner's, who released the film, didn't really know what to do with it at first. But of course, once grunge suddenly was big news and big business, then they put it out. I think it sat on the shelf for like a year because they didn't know how to market it or what to do with it. But as soon as grunge was in the news, that was it. Out it went, and apparently Nirvana were asked to provide a song for the soundtrack, but they didn't want to. Yeah, I mean, if you are a fan of grunge or 90s rock music, then we've covered a couple of documentaries. We spoke about Hype quite some time ago, which obviously was made sort of just after the grunge scene exploded, and then recently we reviewed Underground Inc., which is more about alternative rock. It all came out of grunge really, just by association, having a similar sound. So the sort of rise and fall of that sound. Go and check those out.
Yeah. So anyway, do we have this? You have this. You have the CD. I've got
the soundtrack, and I've got the DVD as well.
That's an old DVD, that one.
It is, it's one of the old snapper cases. Not much on it, the trailer and a couple of outtakes. There is a Blu-ray as well, not in the UK, but in the States and a couple of other countries. It's been released, and it's got a lot more features. After I watched this, I thought, it'd be great to see the full-length performances. And then I looked up the Blu-ray, and lo and behold, they're on there. So that's worth checking out. There's a lot of deleted scenes as well. I think the Bill Pullman stuff. There was a whole sort of subplot that was jettisoned for his character. So there's a lot of stuff with him, and loads of other stuff. There's a gag reel and stuff like that. But the performances, the full-length concert performances are interesting. I mean, you can find them on YouTube if you're interested in watching them. Give them a search. I mean, apparently the picture on the Blu-ray maybe could be doing with a bit of a better restoration. So maybe that will happen. It'll be 30 years old next year, so maybe there'll be an anniversary edition. Probably not, but we can always hope. So, but yeah, I think the Blu-ray's fine. It's obviously better than DVD, but I think it could certainly look better. I couldn't find it streaming anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's I really enjoy this one. I hadn't seen it for quite a long time, but I think it's it's a solid, early 90s romantic comedy with a great soundtrack, and it features those bands. If you like those bands, then they're there for you to see. Yeah. There is a performance from Alice in Chains, and there is a performance. I mean, you don't see the whole performance, but like Simon said, if you've got the Blu-ray, you can see that. But you get to see Soundgarden, you get to see Alice in Chains, two of the kind of the mainstays. They were always my favourite bands of that scene. It's funny, it's warm-hearted, it gets what it was like to be a young adult. Yeah, I think it's worth seeing. I think it's one that possibly has fallen by the wayside. I mean, even Almost Famous is not one that gets talked about a lot. I think Jerry Maguire is obviously Cameron Crowe's
that's his big
film, which I never really liked, I have to say. I mean, it was okay, but I was never that much of a fan. Almost Famous is great, but yeah, they're kind of films that don't get talked so much about anymore, which is a shame because I think they're perfectly good films. And that was Singles. So as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button over there and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's other videos to check out over here. Come and find us on social media and join us again next week for another video.